Hey guys, tonight we begin with a small iron stove, a black coal scuttle, and a question that becomes less comfortable every time the wind strikes the windows. How many more hours of heat are left in that bucket? It is Sunday, March 11th, 1888, somewhere in the northeastern United States. Rain has been falling, and late winter appears to be doing what late winter often does, soaking boots and encouraging everyone with a roof to remain beneath it. A household with enough money may have coal stored in a cellar. A poorer family may have purchased only what it could afford for the next few days. In either case, the fire is not automatic. Someone has carried the fuel. Someone has cleared the ash. Someone must keep the stove alive. The modern fantasy is that 19th century Americans were naturally prepared for cold because their houses had fireplaces, heavy curtains, and people who looked extremely serious in wool. But an old house was not a magical winter fortress. It could be drafty, unevenly heated, smoky, damp, and surprisingly skilled at turning one warm room into 6 cold ones. And the stove did not heat itself, which feels like a design flaw history tolerated for several centuries. At first, the rain does not look like the beginning of a legendary disaster. Weather forecasting exists, but it cannot give an ordinary household the precise warning a phone can deliver today. During the night, the rain turns to snow. By Monday morning, the familiar street outside may be disappearing beneath blowing white. If quiet stories about ordinary people facing very complicated weather make good company tonight, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment with the warmest object within reach of you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Begin inside the house, because that is where survival first becomes a series of small decisions. The fire has probably been reduced overnight rather than kept roaring without pause. Coal costs money. Wood requires storage and labour. In some homes, the kitchen range provides both cooking heat and a centre of warmth. In others, a parlour stove heats the room where the family gathers. Wealthier buildings may have furnaces or early steam systems, but these still depend on fuel, maintenance, and workers. There is no universal Victorian heating arrangement, only systems divided by region, building type, and income. The person rising first faces the least romantic part of old-fashioned warmth. Ash must be managed, the grate must draw properly, coal dust settles on hands and clothing. A weak fire must be coaxed rather than commanded. Open the stove carelessly and smoke may enter the room. Close everything too tightly and the fire may struggle. Warmth is a negotiation conducted with iron, air, fuel, and patience. Now the snow presses against the windows. Wind forces cold air through gaps around frames and doors. Curtains help. Rugs help. Rolled cloth along the bottom of a door may help. None transforms the building, they simply slow the loss. The household begins to shrink its occupied world. A bedroom that seemed usable yesterday becomes a place to visit quickly. Doors are closed. Children, older relatives, or anyone unwell may be brought nearer the stove. Chairs move inward. Clothing remains on indoors. Blankets leave beds and appear over shoulders. This is one quiet truth of surviving severe cold before modern central heating. People often did not warm the entire house. They concentrated life around the heat they could preserve. That concentration had a social shape. The warmest chair was not merely furniture. It might go to an elderly person, a sick child, the household head, or whoever had authority to claim it. Domestic workers in a prosperous home could spend hours carrying coal, tending fires, warming rooms, preparing food, and moving through cold passages so that others experienced comfort as though it simply occurred. In a crowded tenement, several people might share limited heated space because there was no spare room to waste on privacy. Outside, the machinery supporting the stove begins to fail. Snow fills roads and gathers into enormous drifts. Horses struggle. Streetcars stop. Elevated railway lines become dangerous or useless. Trains are buried or stranded. Telegraph wires fall, cutting communities away from information. What appears inside the house as one iron appliance is connected to mines, railroads, coal yards, wagons, animals, dealers, porters, servants, and wage labourers. The fire is the visible end of a long chain. The household may not understand yet how much of that chain has broken. There is still breakfast to make. Water may need to be carried, pumped, or melted. Wet clothing must be dried without scorching it. Boots placed too close to the stove can stiffen, crack, or fill the room with warming leather. Meals requiring long cooking consume more fuel, so simple food becomes practical. The same coal that warms the room may also boil water and heat the range. Every ordinary action now competes for the same shrinking supply. A shovel of coal disappears into the fire. The room brightens. The bucket becomes lighter. In a comfortable home with a stocked cellar, this may remain an inconvenience for a while. In a household buying fuel in small amounts, the calculation becomes urgent sooner. Poverty changes the meaning of weather before it changes the temperature. A wealthy family can possess more coal, blankets, rooms, paid help, and alternative shelter. A poor family may face the same storm outside with far fewer mistakes available inside. The snow also traps people away from home. Office workers, shop assistants, travellers, and labourers discover that distance has changed. A few blocks can become a serious journey when wind removes landmarks and drifts block the street. Some seek shelter where they can find it. Others attempt the walk because missing work can mean losing pay. The blizzard does not pause rent, hunger, or employer expectations because the city has become almost impossible to cross. By Monday, the storm has turned the Northeast's confidence against itself. Railways, telegraph lines, commerce, and crowded cities were symbols of speed and connection. Now trains stand still. Messages cannot pass, and people living near thousands of others may be isolated within a few rooms. Yet the first line of survival remains stubbornly domestic. Keep wet clothing away from the body. Close the unnecessary door. Bring people into the warmest room. Use the fuel carefully. Do not assume another delivery is coming. No single method saves everyone, and surviving accounts are better at describing dramatic streets and stranded trains than anonymous work beside household stoves. We often know that coal became scarce without knowing the name of the woman who carried the final bucket upstairs. We know buildings remained occupied without seeing every hand that shook ash from a grate or every person who surrendered a blanket. That silence matters, because the famous blizzard was endured through thousands of actions too ordinary for newspapers. The wind continues. Snow rises against the outer wall. Somewhere beyond the window, a coal wagon is no longer moving. A railway switch is buried. A horse cannot pull through the drift. A worker expected to deliver fuel is trying to reach shelter himself, inside. The stove glows as though none of that concerns it. But beside the stove, the coal scuttle is no longer full. And before this storm is over, the people gathered around that small circle of heat will discover that the most important part of their heating system was never the iron box in the room. It was everything and everyone required to keep fuel reaching it. The coal itself does not tell you what kind of room it will warm. Drop it into a kitchen range, and the heat gathers around kettles, pans, damp gloves, and the person trying to prepare breakfast without using more fuel than the meal deserves. Feed it into a parlour stove, and one sitting room becomes the household's centre of gravity. Send it into a basement furnace, where such a system exists, and warm air may rise through ducts or floor grates into several rooms. But even then, the result is rarely the smooth, invisible warmth that modern central heating teaches us to expect. Heat in 1888 has edges. Stand close to the stove and your face may feel hot, while your back remains cold. Move toward the doorway and the temperature drops. Climb a staircase and you may find a bedroom chilled enough that the water in a basin feels hostile before you touch it. A house can contain several climates at once. Firelight near the grate, cool air by the windows, and a narrow hallway where everyone suddenly remembers an errand elsewhere. This is why furniture matters. Chairs are drawn closer. A table may be pulled into the heated room. Sewing, reading, eating, mending, and conversation gather around the same source of warmth. Rooms that normally signal privacy or status become less important than the simple question of whether the air hurts to breathe. The household does not merely heat its living space, it rearranges life until life fits inside the heated space. In one middle-class home, a child wakes beneath blankets that have trapped some warmth through the night. The bedroom itself is cold. Clothing kept beside the bed goes on quickly, layer by layer, before bare feet meet the floor. The child carries a wash basin toward the stove rather than pretending that morning hygiene must occur heroically beside an icy window. Victorian discipline had limits, and cold porcelain was one of them. Downstairs, the kitchen is already active. A coal or wood range can cook food, heat water, dry clothing, and warm the room, which makes it useful, but also demanding. Damp fabric hung too near the stove may scorch. A kettle left unattended can boil dry. Ash collects beneath the grate. Fuel must be added in amounts that keep the fire steady without wasting it. The person responsible for the range learns its moods through repetition. The sound of the draft, the colour of the fire, the resistance of a stubborn damper. None of this knowledge arrives through a thermostat. The stove speaks through smoke, metal, and timing. If the chimney draws poorly, smoke may leak into the room. If the fire is allowed to fall too low, rebuilding it consumes time and kindling. If too much coal is added badly, the fire may struggle beneath it. A warm room is therefore less like pressing a button and more like maintaining a small industrial negotiation before breakfast. And, naturally, the negotiation produces ash. Ash must be removed, carried, and disposed of without covering the household in grey dust. Coal must travel in the opposite direction, often from cellar to stove, one bucket at a time. In a large house, servants may repeat this route through back stairs and service passages, while the family experiences the finished result in a cleaner room. Comfort appears upstairs because labour keeps climbing from below. The same distinction exists without servants. In a working household, the person tending the stove may also be cooking, dressing children, finding dry socks, checking on an older relative, and wondering whether the employer expects everyone to arrive despite the storm. Heating is not a separate task. It is woven into the morning's entire workload. Every opened door releases warmth. Every wet coat adds moisture. Every person entering from outside brings snow that must melt somewhere. The house begins to smell of wool, coal smoke, food, and damp leather. That mixture is not simply atmosphere. It is evidence of bodies being protected. Wet clothing conducts heat away from the body, so drying it matters. Layers matter. Wool remains useful because it holds insulating air and can still offer some protection when damp, though no fabric makes prolonged exposure safe. Scarves, shawls, stockings, mittens, coats, caps, quilts, and blankets all become parts of the heating system. The body is the final room. People can reduce the space that must be warmed by warming themselves. More layers, shared blankets, warmed bricks or stones where available, and beds prepared to hold heat rather than create it. Some households use bed warmers or heated objects wrapped carefully in cloth. Such methods can make cold bedding tolerable, but they require fuel first. Even the warm brick owes its comfort to the stove. Beds themselves work through enclosure. Curtains around a bed, thick coverings, feather mattresses in wealthier homes, straw or other fillings in humbler ones, and multiple sleepers sharing warmth can all reduce heat loss. Yet bedding varies sharply by income, household, and region. There is no single American winter bed waiting neatly behind the title. There is also no universal fireplace scene. Open fireplaces remain in use, but they send much of their heat upward with the smoke and warm nearby bodies more effectively than distant rooms. Stoves can extract more useful heat from fuel and occupy less space, though they bring their own hazards and labour. Furnaces offer broader distribution in some larger or newer buildings, but ducts and grates do not erase drafts, fuel dependence, uneven temperatures, or class difference. The old house is therefore not superior to the modern one. It is simply managed differently. Its occupants understand doors as valves. Curtains become insulation. Rugs interrupt cold floors. Unused rooms are allowed to cool. Cooking is scheduled around available fire. Family routines bend toward the heat source. People survive partly by accepting a smaller geography. During the blizzard, that geography contracts further. A parlour that normally exists for visitors may become a sleeping room. Mattresses can be moved. Children may be settled near adults. Someone remains awake later to judge the fire. A person getting up during the night may add fuel, check the draft, and place a hand near the stove before deciding whether the household can afford another shovel. That last question is where comfort becomes arithmetic. A full coal bin encourages confidence. A half-filled one encourages caution. A nearly empty one changes the meaning of every sound outside. Wagon wheels would mean delivery. A knock might mean news. Silence means the storm still controls the road. In rural districts, wood may be more available, but it still has to be cut, split, seasoned, stored, and carried. Green or wet wood burns poorly. A drift can block access to an outdoor pile. An isolated farmhouse may possess fuel, yet still face danger if someone must fight through wind to retrieve it. Material abundance in the yard is not the same as warmth beside the bed. In cities, the fuel may be physically closer and economically less secure. Tenants purchasing coal in small quantities cannot rely on a great cellar reserve. Crowded buildings may contain several stoves, several families, shared passages, and landlords whose responsibility for heat depends on the building and arrangement. The storm exposes all those differences without creating them. By the second day, people are no longer merely heating rooms. They are preserving islands. One stove, one range, one bed made warmer by several bodies, one kitchen where food, water, clothing, and conversation collect. Beyond the closed door, the rest of the house cools in silence. And beside the stove, the coal scuttle waits to be lifted again. The coal scuttle waits beside the stove, but outside, the weather is no longer waiting for anyone. On Sunday evening, March 11th, 1888, Much of the northeastern United States is wet rather than white. Rain falls across streets, roofs, railway platforms, and muddy roads. In New York City, people still move through umbrellas, horse cars, elevated trains, shop doors, and Sunday routines. The air is unpleasant, but not yet legendary. That matters, because disasters are easier to imagine after they have received a name. At the time, this is simply weather becoming inconvenient. A family watching rain streak the window does not know that the same pain may soon be rattling under wind-driven snow. A railway worker does not begin his shift believing that tracks will disappear. A shopkeeper does not necessarily assume that the next delivery will fail. The city and the towns around it are built on motion, and motion has become so ordinary that people rarely notice how much survival depends upon it. Then the temperature falls. Rain changes to sleet and snow. Water on streets and clothing begins to freeze. Wind gathers strength, lifting loose snow from the ground and driving new snow sideways. What accumulates is not a neat, even blanket. It piles against buildings, fences, railway cuts, station platforms, doors, and anything else that interrupts the air. One doorway may remain passable while another is sealed by a drift. One stretch of street may show exposed cobbles while the next becomes a white wall. The danger is not only how much snow falls, it is what the wind does with it. The first person opening a door in the morning may discover that the storm has rearranged the architecture. Snow presses against the threshold. Wind enters the moment the door moves. A path cleared an hour earlier begins filling again. The ordinary distance between kitchen and woodshed, home and shop, station and office, becomes longer because every step must be forced through resistance. You would probably make your first mistake by trusting the map. The bakery is still 3 blocks away. The workplace is still visible in memory. The station has not moved. But the route between these places no longer behaves like ordinary space. Familiar signs disappear. Street corners look alike. Snow blinds the eyes and dampens sound. Wind steals warmth from exposed skin, much faster than a calm thermometer reading suggests. This is how the storm turns confidence into risk. People leave home because they have responsibilities. They need food, fuel, wages, medicine, news, or relatives. Some employers expect workers to appear. Some travelers have already begun journeys and cannot simply return. Others step outside believing they can manage a short distance because they have crossed it hundreds of times before. History often remembers those decisions as foolish, only because we know what happened next. The person at the door does not yet know whether the storm will ease in an hour or continue through the day. Weather reports travel slowly, and telegraph connections are already vulnerable. Forecasting exists, but it cannot provide the detailed certainty modern viewers expect. Information arrives unevenly, sometimes after conditions have changed. So someone tightens a coat, pulls down a hat, and steps into the wind. Within minutes, the body begins paying for the decision. Snow enters around the collar and cuffs. Wool becomes heavy. Boots collect moisture. The face turns numb, which can feel like relief before it becomes danger. Breathing into a scarf warms the air slightly, but also adds dampness. Every pause allows cold to settle deeper into clothing. The street is no longer a corridor between heated buildings. It is an exposed space that must be crossed before the body's stored heat runs down. Horses struggle too. Cities in 1888 depend on animal power for delivery wagons, private carriages, omnibuses, fire equipment, and countless smaller movements. Deep snow and hidden ice make pulling difficult. A horse that slips can block a street. A team unable to move a loaded wagon cannot deliver coal, merely because the household at the other end desperately needs it. This is where the blizzard begins to reveal its real structure. The snow does not need to enter every home. It only needs to stop what normally reaches the home. Stop the coal wagon, and tomorrow's heat becomes uncertain. Stop the milk cart, and families begin stretching food. Stop the railway, and towns lose supplies as well as passengers. Bring down telegraph wires, and uncertainty travels faster than news. A stove can still be burning brightly while the system feeding it has already failed. At railway stations, the trouble appears gradually. Delays lengthen, tracks vanish beneath drifting snow, switches freeze or become buried, engines labour against conditions their schedules were never designed to negotiate. A train may move a short distance, stop, reverse, or become trapped altogether. Inside a carriage, passengers remain protected from the worst wind, but shelter is not the same as safety. Heat depends on the stove and its fuel. Food depends on what passengers carried or what might be available nearby. Water, sanitation, and patience all become problems as hours accumulate. The timetable, printed with Victorian confidence, has become decorative. In towns and cities, elevated railways and street transport suffer their own failures. People waiting for service receive fragments of rumour. A train is coming. No, the line is blocked. A car is stopped further down. Someone says the wind is easing. Someone else has just come in covered with snow and says the opposite. The storm isolates people while crowding them together. A station waiting room fills. A hotel lobby gains unexpected guests. Shopkeepers allow stranded customers to remain. Saloons, offices, restaurants, and private homes become temporary shelters, because refusing a person at the door may send them back into visibly dangerous conditions. That kindness still has a cost. Every new body consumes space, food, and heat. A door opening repeatedly releases warm air. Wet coats steam near stoves. Floors become slick. A proprietor must decide how long fuel will last. A household taking in neighbours adds more people to the same fire without adding more coal to the bucket. The calculation made inside one family's parlour is now being made across the region. How much fuel remains? How many people must share it? How long will the storm continue? No one can answer the final question with confidence. By Monday. March 12th, wind and snow have overwhelmed ordinary movement across the northeast. In some locations, drifts rise far above a person's head. Roads are blocked. Rail traffic is paralysed. Telegraph communication fails across wide areas. The modern industrial city, proud of its speed, discovers that a storm can reduce it to small heated rooms separated by dangerous white space. And yet, inside those rooms, routine continues because routine must. Someone stirs a pot. Someone wrings water from a stocking. Someone checks the stove draft. Someone listens for wheels that do not come. The storm outside becomes loud enough to dominate every pause. Wind presses against walls and moans around corners. Snow scrapes at the glass. The house shifts and clicks as temperatures fall. People speak more quietly, not because they are calm, but because listening has become a form of information. A break in the wind might mean change. A knock might mean a traveller. A distant bell might mean emergency. Mostly, there is only the weather. The great blizzard does not arrive as one dramatic moment. It tightens. Rain becomes snow. Snow becomes drifting. A difficult journey becomes an impossible one. A delayed delivery becomes a missing supply. A warm stove becomes a clock. Beside that stove, the coal scuttle waits for the next hand. And beyond the closed door, the path to the coal yard has already disappeared. The path to the coal yard has disappeared, so the household begins drawing new borders inside the house. The first border is a closed door. A room that was useful yesterday may now be surrendered to the cold. A spare bedroom, front parlour, or upstairs chamber can be shut off so the stove is not asked to warm empty air. Curtains are pulled. Rugs are checked. Rolled cloth or old garments may be pressed along the bottom of a door. The goal is not to make the house comfortable. The goal is to stop comfort from escaping faster than the fire can replace it. This changes the map of daily life. The warmest room becomes kitchen, sitting room, drying room, sick room, nursery, and, by night, sleeping room. Chairs move inward. A table is shifted closer to the stove. Bedding is carried downstairs. A mattress that belongs on the second floor may now lie beside a wall where everyone can still feel the heat. Privacy begins losing arguments to temperature. A child who normally sleeps alone may share space with siblings. An elderly relative may be settled nearest the stove. Someone with a cough, fever, or weak circulation receives extra blankets if the household has them. Everyone else adjusts. The room becomes crowded, which is inconvenient and useful. Everybody releases heat. Several people beneath quilts preserve more warmth than one person alone. Shared sleeping cannot overcome dangerous cold, but it makes the heated space work harder. This is why people gather instead of remaining politely distributed through the building. Victorian manners were powerful, but a blizzard could make them negotiate. The household now watches every opening. A person entering from outside brings news, snow, wet clothing, and a burst of cold air. The door must be opened quickly, then shut firmly. Coats are brushed where the mess can be managed. Snow clinging to wool melts into water. Mittens, scarves, stockings and boots are arranged near the stove, but not so near that they scorch, shrink, or begin producing smells strong enough to become a second emergency. Wet wool fills the room with a heavy animal warmth. Leather softens, then stiffens as it dries. Coal smoke and cooking smells settle into curtains and hair. Someone places a hand against a sleeve and decides it is still too damp to wear outside. That small judgment may prevent the next journey from beginning badly. Clothing is one of the household's portable walls. Shirts, stockings, dresses, waistcoats, coats, shawls, caps, gloves, and layered skirts trap air close to the body. A prosperous family may possess more changes of dry clothing. A labourer may own one heavy coat and need it ready before morning. This is where household labour becomes survival labour. Someone must rotate the garments. Someone must keep children away from the stove's hot metal. Someone must notice that a boot is drying too quickly or that a blanket has become damp. Someone must prepare food while bodies, bedding, and laundry occupy the same shrinking space. That person is often a woman, a mother, an older daughter, or a domestic servant, though arrangements vary. Newspapers may describe the height of the drifts and the failure of trains. They rarely measure how many times someone bent to adjust a stove, lift a wet child, carry a kettle, or move a blanket closer to the heat. Warmth leaves few records when it is maintained successfully. The fire itself needs guarding. A coal stove can become fiercely hot, but allowing it to roar wastes fuel and may overheat the nearest part of the room while doing little for distant corners. The draft is adjusted, fuel is added in measured amounts, ash is removed. The person tending the fire learns to read it by sound and glow. A dull fire may need air. A bright fire may need less. A sudden smell of smoke means attention now. This is household engineering without gauges, conducted by people who may also be making soup and trying to keep children from stepping on a mattress. Meals change with the room. Food that requires long baking or boiling may demand too much fuel. A pot that can simmer near the working stove becomes practical. Bread, preserved food, potatoes, oats, soup, tea, and whatever is already stored matter more than elaborate cooking. The storm has interrupted markets, carts, trains, and deliveries, so the pantry begins to resemble the coal scuttle. Every use is also a subtraction. Warm food does more than satisfy hunger. It warms hands around a bowl. It produces steam. It gives the day structure when schedules have become meaningless. People eat because it is morning, then because the light has changed, then because the storm remains and another meal must be made. Water creates its own difficulties. Pipes, pumps, wells, and indoor arrangements differ from one building to another. Cold can freeze exposed pipes. Outdoor access may be blocked. Snow can be melted in an emergency, but it produces less water than its volume suggests and requires heat that might otherwise warm the room or cook food. The beautiful white abundance outside is not a free kettle. History remains committed to making simple things labor-intensive. Even washing becomes strategic. A full bath is not the priority. Hands, faces, cooking utensils, and basic cleanliness are managed with limited warm water. Dampness must not spread. Floors near the door are wiped or covered. Meltwater is contained before it soaks bedding or freezes in an unheated passage. The warm room is therefore never still. Someone crosses it carrying coal. Someone lifts a kettle. Someone checks a child's socks. Someone feeds a guest who cannot safely leave. Someone lowers a lamp wick to conserve oil. Someone wakes because the stove has gone quiet. At night, the household faces its hardest decision. A fire left too low may allow the room to become dangerously cold. A fire kept strong consumes fuel needed tomorrow. One person may remain awake longer than the others, listening to wind against the building and measuring time by the stove's fading glow. The people sleeping closest to the heat are not necessarily comfortable. They may wake sweating on one side and cold on the other. The stove dries the air and makes metal surfaces dangerous to touch. Sparks, smoke, and carbon monoxide are risks, though people in 1888 would not always understand those dangers as modern science does. Ventilation matters, but opening the room also releases precious warmth. Survival contains contradictions like this. Seal the room, but not so tightly that smoke cannot escape. Dry the clothing, but do not burn it. Keep the stove hot, but do not consume tomorrow's coal. Gather people close, but make space for the person who has arrived from outside. In wealthier homes, more fuel and servants soften these choices. In poorer rooms, the margin is narrow. A family renting crowded quarters may have no spare bedding, large pantry, or cellar full of coal. The same closed door that preserves heat can reveal how little space exists behind it. Yet neighbours can change that equation. A household with a stronger fire may shelter someone whose room has gone cold. Food can be combined. News can be shared. A child can be watched while an adult searches for fuel. Mutual aid is not romantic when everyone is tired, wet, and worried. It is practical cooperation under pressure. Outside, the snow continues erasing roads. Inside, the family erases rooms. The front parlour cools. The hallway becomes a passage crossed quickly. Life contracts toward the iron stove until the entire household seems to breathe within the reach of its heat. And when another shovel of coal falls onto the fire, every face in the room brightens for a moment, while the scuttle beside it grows lighter. The scuttle grows lighter because someone keeps lifting it. That person may begin in the cellar, where the air is colder, darker, and thick with coal dust. The fuel is stored below because it is heavy, dirty, and best kept away from finished rooms. But the stove is upstairs, which means warmth must be carried by hand. A full coal scuttle is not elegant. It pulls at the shoulder, presses against the fingers, and leaves black marks on skirts, cuffs, aprons, and walls. The carrier climbs steps carefully because spilling coal means stopping to collect it, and because falling on a narrow staircase with a metal bucket is an efficient way to turn bad weather into a household injury. In a prosperous home, a servant may make this journey again and again. The family sees the glowing stove. The servant sees the cellar, the ash pan, the back stairs, and the distance between them. That distance is part of the heating system. Coal arrives at the house through mines, railways, yards, carts, and delivery workers. But its final movement is often domestic. No engine carries the last bucket to the grate. A person does. The weight disappears into the stove, and so does the labour. Because once the room is warm, warmth looks natural. It is not natural. It is scheduled. Someone wakes before others, so the kitchen will not remain cold. Someone shakes down the grate, removes yesterday's ash, arranges kindling if the fire has died, and waits for the first reliable heat. Someone checks whether the chimney draws. Someone wipes coal dust from the floor before it is walked through the house. By the time the household gathers, the hardest part of morning may already be over. This is especially true in homes with domestic servants, where comfort is designed to hide effort. A maid may enter a cold bedroom to light or tend a fire before the occupant leaves a warm bed. A cook keeps the range alive because breakfast, hot water, and kitchen heat all depend on it. A general servant in a smaller household may be expected to do both, along with cleaning, carrying, serving, and answering the door. During the blizzard, those duties do not become simpler. They multiply. More people remain indoors. More clothing becomes wet. More water must be heated. More meals are prepared at home. More doors are open for stranded neighbours or family members. And every extra demand reaches the same stove. The cook places a pot over the heat while judging how much coal the fire can spare. A kettle warms beside it. Damp mittens hang nearby. Someone asks whether there is enough hot water for washing. Someone else wants tea. A child complains that the bedroom is freezing. The range receives these requests without sympathy. It can only burn what it is given. The person tending it becomes the household's real thermostat, ration clerk, and maintenance engineer, though no one uses those titles. She learns to delay one task so another can happen. Water can heat while soup simmers. Bread may be toasted over existing heat rather than baked separately. Clothing is moved closer after cooking when the stove is already hot. Efficiency appears as routine because routine is how people survive repeated labour. Ash creates the opposite journey. After coal burns, it leaves weight behind. The ash pan fills with fine grey residue, clinker, and fragments that did not burn cleanly. If left too long, ash can obstruct airflow and weaken the fire, so it must be removed, often while the stove remains hot. The pan is pulled out carefully. Dust rises. A sudden draft can send it across the floor. The ash must then be carried downstairs or outside to a proper container, depending on the building and local practice. Hot embers require caution. Dump them carelessly, and they can ignite rubbish, wood, or anything else willing to make the storm more memorable. This is not glamorous work. It is repetitive, dirty, and essential. Coal goes up. Ash comes down. Warmth remains in the middle for a few hours. In crowded housing, these movements become more difficult. Narrow stairs, shared halls, limited storage, and several households using separate stoves create traffic and mess. A tenant buying coal in small amounts may carry it from a nearby dealer, when a dealer can be reached at all. Children may be sent on errands under ordinary conditions, though the blizzard makes even short trips dangerous. A small bag of coal can mean the difference between a cold evening and a survivable one. But carrying it home costs energy at the exact moment the body is already fighting cold. Hands become stiff. Wet fabric rubs against skin. Breathing hard in icy air pulls cold deeper into the chest. A person who returns with fuel may need the fire almost as much as the household does. This is one reason the phrase, "they kept the stove going," hides too much. Who are they? Who wakes? Who lifts? Who loses sleep? Who takes the risk outside? Who gets the warm chair afterward? The answers change by household, class, age, and circumstance, but the burden is not distributed evenly. Women often carry much of the domestic workload. Servants may keep elite homes comfortable while sleeping in colder rooms themselves. Older children may help with fuel, water, younger siblings, and cleaning. Men may cut wood, shovel paths, search for coal, or repair storm damage. But household warmth still depends on a chain of tasks rather than one heroic action. The blizzard makes that chain visible because it is harder to maintain. A servant who normally returns home after work may be unable to leave. She may sleep in the employer's house, not as a guest, but because the storm has made travel impossible, and the household still expects fires, meals, and cleaning. Her presence increases the number of bodies indoors, while also preserving the comfort of others. A mother in a poorer room may have no servant, no reserve of coal, and no private space in which to rest. She tends the fire while feeding children, drying clothing, and calculating whether tomorrow will bring fuel. If she becomes ill or exhausted, the household loses several systems at once. This is the human cost of manual heating. The machine fails when the person does. Even strength has limits. Coal dust irritates eyes and lungs. Repeated lifting strains the back. Heat dries skin and makes the stove area uncomfortable. Moving between a hot kitchen and an icy passage shocks the body again and again. Sleep is interrupted by the need to check the fire. Meals are delayed because fuel must be conserved. Fingers cracked by cold still have to handle metal tools. And because much of this labour happens indoors, it rarely enters the dramatic story of the storm. The famous images show snowdrifts, stranded trains, buried streets, and men digging through white walls. They do not show the woman kneeling to clear a grate for the 4th time that day. They do not show the servant carrying coal past a closed bedroom door. They do not show the child holding a lamp while ash is emptied. Yet those scenes are the blizzard too. By late evening, the warm room has consumed another portion of its fuel. The people nearest the stove may feel secure enough to stop thinking about it. The person responsible for the fire cannot. She looks at the coal remaining. She looks at the wind pressing snow against the glass. Then she lifts the scuttle once more, and the entire household's comfort rises with it. The final bucket rises from the cellar, but the next one may already be trapped somewhere beyond the city. Coal does not travel well through a blizzard. Before it reaches a household stove, it is usually passed through a chain of mines, freight cars, rail yards, storage sheds, dealers, wagons, horses, and labourers. Under ordinary conditions, that chain is easy to ignore. A family buys fuel, a delivery appears. Black lumps move into the cellar, and the machinery behind them disappears from view. The storm brings the machinery back. Rail lines vanish beneath snow. Switches freeze or become buried. Freight cars remain where they stopped. Horses cannot pull loaded wagons through drifts that rise against buildings and fences. Even when a coal yard contains fuel, the distance between the yard and a customer may become impassable. The household fire is still burning, but replacement fuel has stopped moving. This is the moment when a reserve becomes a clock. A family with a full cellar can continue almost normally for a while. Coal is still rationed, because no one knows how long the interruption will last. But there is room for confidence. A tenant who purchases a small quantity at a time has no such cushion. The last few shovelfuls are not merely fuel. They are the remaining hours during which the room can stay warm, water can be heated, and food can be cooked. Two homes on the same street may therefore experience different storms. In one, the stove glows steadily while servants continue carrying coal from below. In another, the fire is allowed to sink because the household must save something for the night. The snow outside is identical. The margin inside is not. Local shops face the same pressure. Customers who can reach them ask for coal, wood, food, lamp oil, candles, and anything else that might make confinement safer. Stocks diminish. Prices may rise where scarcity and opportunity meet, although surviving reports do not let us treat every merchant as either generous or predatory. Some extend credit, some ration goods, some simply have nothing left to sell. A coal dealer cannot shovel a promise into a customer's bucket. The dealer may possess piles of fuel behind a fence, while lacking horses, drivers, passable streets, or workers able to reach the yard. A delivery wagon loaded too heavily risks becoming fixed in the snow. A lighter load means fewer households served. Every route requires judgment, strength, and luck. The horse also has needs. It requires food, water, shelter, and rest. Grain deliveries are disrupted by the same transportation failure affecting coal. Animals working through deep snow tire quickly. A fallen or exhausted horse can halt an entire wagon, and a city dependent on animal transport discovers that fuel delivery has muscles, lungs, and a limit. Farther along the chain, the railroads are fighting a larger version of the same problem. Locomotives need coal and water. Crews must reach them. Tracks must remain visible and open. Snowplows can push through ordinary accumulation, but wind drives snow back into cleared cuts. A train may advance only to meet another drift packed hard across the line. Thousands of workers will eventually be sent to free stalled trains, but the first hours belong to uncertainty. Passengers sit in cars that are no longer transportation. They have become narrow shelters placed accidentally in the snow. Many passenger cars carry wood-burning stoves. As long as fuel remains, that iron box offers warmth against the cold outside. But the car has no cellar, and the scheduled journey was not supposed to last for days. When the wood supply runs out, the passengers and crew face the same question as the family beside the coal scuttle. What inside this shelter can become fuel? Accounts from the blizzard describe card tables and seats being chopped apart to feed railway stoves. It is a remarkable image, but the logic is plain. Furniture is valuable while a train is moving. When the train is buried and the temperature falls, the value of a wooden seat changes. You cannot sit comfortably on a frozen chair if the stove has gone out. A table leg enters the fire. A section of seat follows. The carriage gradually consumes its own interior to preserve the people inside it. This is improvisation, but it is not limitless. Painted, treated, or upholstered materials can produce unpleasant or dangerous smoke. The stove requires ventilation. Tools may be scarce. Every board burned is gone permanently. Yet survival often begins by changing the category of an object. Furniture becomes fuel. Curtains become insulation. A public room becomes a dormitory. A shop becomes a refuge. Back in the city, households begin searching for similar substitutions. Wood scraps, broken boxes, old boards, and unused furniture may be considered where they are available and safe enough to burn, although there is no reason to imagine every family dismantling its home. Many people continue using stored coal or wood. Others seek shelter with neighbours, relatives, hotels, boarding houses or businesses that still have functioning fires. Moving people toward fuel can be easier than moving fuel toward people. A family whose stove has failed may cross a hallway rather than a street. Two households may share one heated room. A landlord may open a common space. The shopkeeper may allow stranded people to remain beside a stove after business has become impossible. Each new arrival also shortens the supply. More bodies make the room warmer, but more people require food, hot water, dry space, and time near the fire. A household taking in travellers must decide whether generosity can continue through another night. The answer may be yes, but it is never free. The storm makes arithmetic out of kindness. A woman looks at the coal remaining and calculates how many fires it can support. A hotel keeper considers the guests already inside and the people still knocking. A railway crew counts pieces of wood that used to be furniture. A dealer watches a yard full of coals separated from customers by streets no wagon can cross. Everywhere, abundance and access have come apart. This is the hidden weakness behind 19th century heating. The stove may be sturdy, the fuel may exist, the people may know exactly how to use both, but warmth still depends on movement. Mines must produce, railroads must carry, yards must receive, wagons must deliver, hands must lift. Once the blizzard stops that movement, the household begins living on what the system delivered before the snow arrived. The fire is no longer simply warming the room. It is consuming the past. Each shovel contains labour already completed, coal already mined, loaded, transported, sold, and carried downstairs. No new supply has entered the chain. The pile can only shrink. Near the window, the wind continues shaping the road into a wall. Near the stove, someone scrapes the bottom of the scuttle and hears metal beneath the coal. That scrape of metal beneath the coal sounds different depending on how much money is in the house. For a wealthy family, it may mean that another bin should be opened, another servant sent below, or another dealer contacted once the streets become passable. The household may have several fireplaces, a furnace, spare blankets, stored food, and rooms large enough to absorb unexpected guests. The storm is frightening, but it arrives inside a structure built with reserves. For a family living close to the weekly wage, the same sound may mean there is no second bin. The coal was bought in small quantities because small quantities were what the household could afford. Rent still waits, food still costs money. Missing work may mean missing pay. The storm has not created poverty, but it has removed nearly every trick used to keep poverty manageable. A few pieces of coal remain at the bottom of the scuttle. Someone counts them without appearing to count. The fire is lowered. The stove door closes. A child is told not to open the room again. Tea is made with water already warm rather than a fresh kettle. A pot is moved so one fire can cook and heat at the same time. These decisions look minor from outside. Inside the room, they determine whether the last fuel lasts until morning. Warmth has a price. Before the blizzard, during it, and after it. The obvious price is the coal itself. The less obvious prices are storage space, delivery access, strong backs, reliable wages, blankets, food reserves, and the authority to remain indoors. Two households may own similar stoves, yet one possesses the entire support system required to keep its stove useful. The other owns an iron box that is slowly becoming cold. Class difference appears in the shape of the building. A large residence may have a cellar capable of holding substantial fuel. Its occupants may close unused rooms while preserving several heated areas. Domestic workers carry coal, tend fires, prepare meals, and clear snow from entrances. The family's problem is serious, but it is distributed across more fuel, more labour, and more space. In a crowded tenement or boarding room, storage can be limited. Several families may depend on separate stoves, shared halls, narrow stairways, and fuel purchased frequently. The front door opens and cold air enters every time someone seeks news or shelter. Wet clothing accumulates because there is nowhere else to place it. Privacy is not surrendered as an emergency measure. There was very little of it to begin with. A stove in such a room has many jobs and almost no room for failure. It warms the people, it heats the water, it cooks the meal, it dries the clothes, and because history enjoys assigning 4 jobs to one object, it may also become the only bright place in the room. Lamp oil and candles are resources too. Telegraph and electrical failures darken parts of the city, while travel becomes dangerous after sunset. A family conserving fuel may also conserve light, gathering near the stove and lowering the lamp. The darkness beyond the room grows larger. For those with money, another heated building may offer escape. A hotel, club, well-supplied boarding house, or relative's home can become refuge if it can be reached. Payment buys a room, a meal, a bed, and access to someone else's stored fuel. It does not guarantee luxury. Hotels can become crowded, staffs can be stranded, and supplies can shrink. But purchasing shelter remains a choice unavailable to someone who has barely enough money for coal at home. Moving to warmth also requires safe passage. The blizzard makes even privilege walk. A carriage may become stuck. A driver may refuse the journey. Horses may be exhausted. A traveller in expensive clothing can still become disoriented in a white street. Wealth reduces risk. It does not persuade the wind to behave professionally. Those without alternatives stay where they are. A woman presses cloth around a window frame. An older child carries ash down a dark stair. A boarder contributes a few pieces of wood. A neighbour brings soup but needs to remain beside the fire because her own room has become too cold. The household expands while its reserve contracts. No one announces this as a social policy. They simply move another chair closer. Mutual aid becomes one of the storm's most practical heating systems. People share rooms, food, information, bedding, and work. A person with fuel may shelter someone without it. A shopkeeper may keep stranded people indoors. A household may accept refugees who cannot safely continue through the snow. A Smithsonian account preserves one unusually severe example from Hartford, Connecticut, where a woman was trapped in her house for 3 days with about a dozen refugees as food ran out. The detail is memorable because it is extreme. It should not be treated as the ordinary experience of every household. What it does show is how quickly private supplies could become communal supplies when the storm placed strangers beneath one roof. The fire was no longer serving one family, it was serving whoever had managed to reach it. That generosity carries bodily cost. More wet clothes must be dried, more food must be divided, more people sleep on floors or chairs. Someone stays awake to tend the stove. Someone accepts the colder place farther from it. Hospitality during a blizzard often means transferring comfort away from the host in small, quiet portions. Employers could transfer risk in the other direction. In 1888, many workers had little protection against lost wages. A documented Connecticut wire worker named William Scribner reportedly walked about a mile through the blizzard to reach his factory. He arrived near the gate as the shift whistle sounded, only to have the guard lock it before he entered. The story survives because its cruelty is so clean. The worker takes the physical risk. The clock keeps the authority. The locked gate keeps the wage. It is bureaucracy with frostbite. Not every employer behaved this way, and one anecdote cannot represent every workplace. But the incident reveals the pressure behind many dangerous journeys. A labourer stepping into the storm may not be confused about the weather. He may be choosing between bodily danger today and unpaid rent later. The rich can often wait for the city to reopen. The poor may be required to prove that they tried. This difference follows people back into the heated room. Someone who spent hours outdoors needs dry clothing, food, and a place near the stove. If the attempt earned no wage, the household has used fuel and strength without replacing either. Survival is not only about getting through the storm, it is about what remains afterward. Coal purchased on credit becomes debt. Food shared today leaves less tomorrow. A missed shift weakens the next week. A damaged coat may not be replaceable. The blizzard lasts a few days, but scarcity remembers it longer. By evening, a prosperous house may still glow from several windows. Across the same street, another household may have concentrated everyone around a single dim stove. Snow makes the roofs look equal. It covers brick, wood, carriage steps, cellar doors, and rubbish with the same white surface. Inside, nothing is equal. One family hears coal settling in a full bin. Another hears the shovel strike bare metal. The person holding that shovel does not need a newspaper to explain class. She can feel it in the weight that is no longer there. The weight that is no longer there began far from the room. Before the coal reached the scupper, it lay underground in northeastern Pennsylvania, locked inside seams of anthracite. Men cut, drilled, blasted, sorted, and loaded it in a landscape where entire towns depended on the black rock beneath them. The fuel that looked so quiet beside a household stove had already passed through noise, danger, dust, machinery, and human lungs. Then it had to leave the valley. Railroads carried anthracite toward cities across the northeast. Freight cars rolled out of mining districts toward New York, New England, and countless smaller markets. Other routes used canals and river connections, though rail had become increasingly important by the late 19th century. Coal companies, transport firms, investors, engineers, brakemen, yard workers, and clerks all stood between the mine and the morning fire. The stove in the room was really a railroad with a small iron door. That is the meaning the blizzard changes. Until the storm, the household seems to own its heat. Coal sits in the cellar. A family purchases it from a dealer. A servant or relative carries it upstairs. The fire appears private, contained within brick walls and domestic routine. But the warmth belongs partly to distant tracks. It belongs to a locomotive arriving on time. It belongs to a railway switch remaining clear. It belongs to a horse strong enough to pull a wagon. It belongs to a driver willing and able to reach the address. It belongs to miners who have already worked underground and labourers who have already moved the load from one system into another. The home is not separate from industry. The home is where industry ends. A woman lifting the stove lid may never see the mine, the rail yard, or the coal dock. Yet every piece she drops onto the fire carries those places into the room. The shiny black surface contains compressed ancient plant matter, but socially it contains something more recent: wages, schedules, injuries, contracts, weather, and an impressive amount of paperwork pretending not to be involved. The blizzard breaks that connection one section at a time. Snow blocks a line. A freight train stops. A yard receives no new cars. A dealer cannot replenish his stock. A wagon remains under shelter because the horse cannot cross the street. A household opens its cellar door and finds only what arrived before Sunday night. This is why the storm does not have to destroy the stove. It only has to isolate it. The distinction matters because 19th century Americans were not surviving through some lost instinct for cold. They were using modern systems for their own period. Large, complicated, industrial systems that felt dependable until several points failed together. The railroad network was one of the wonders of the age. By 1880, tracks extended across tens of thousands of miles, binding mines, factories, ports, towns, and cities into a speed of exchange earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Anthracite from the Lackawanna and Wyoming valleys helped heat homes and power industry throughout the Northeast. Railways did not merely carry passengers, they carried the conditions that made urban life possible. And then the weather removed the rails without lifting a single length of iron. The tracks remain under the snow, but functionally, they have vanished. At a rail yard, a crew faces rows of cars that cannot move. Snowpacks around wheels and switches. Wind drives loose powder into every space just cleared. A locomotive has power, fuel, and skilled operators, yet power is useless when the route ahead has become a wall. Men shovel. A plough advances. The wind refills the cut. History sometimes describes industrial progress as a straight line. The blizzard responds by burying the line and making everyone dig for it. Farther south or west, coal may still be moving normally. A mine may still be producing. The fuel shortage in a city does not necessarily mean the country has run out of coal. It means coal exists in the wrong place. That difference is the foundation of logistics. A full freight car stranded 50 miles away cannot warm one room tonight. A dealer with tons of coal behind his fence cannot help a customer if no wagon can cross the drifts. A hotel with a large reserve may remain warm while a nearby family lets its stove fade. Material supply and human need can stand close together and still fail to meet. The blizzard turns distance into a form of scarcity. It also exposes the people who usually disappear inside that distance. Consider the miner before dawn. Descending underground days or weeks before the storm, he does not know which particular stove will burn the coal he cuts. Consider the breaker workers sorting the fuel, the crews coupling freight cars, the brakeman exposed to winter air, the yard labourer moving loads, the clerk recording quantities, the stable worker feeding delivery horses, and the driver carrying sacks or buckets to individual buildings. The family sees none of them when the fire burns correctly, when the delivery fails. Their absence enters the room. This does not mean every link has stopped working. Some workers continue under punishing conditions. Crews attempt to free trains. Men shovel routes through drifts. Drivers test streets that may or may not be passable. Telegraph workers try to restore lines. The system has not vanished. It has become visible through struggle. Visibility, unfortunately, often arrives after comfort has failed. In a wealthy home, the industrial chain may leave a larger reserve. The cellar contains enough coal to survive several blocked days. The family experiences the storm as isolation rather than immediate cold. In a poorer home, the same chain has delivered only what weekly money could purchase. Industrial dependence is therefore filtered through class before the snow ever falls. The railroad serves both households, but not equally. One buys by the ton. Another buys by the basket. One can wait for the network to recover. Another begins running out while the first drifts are still growing. Near a city coal yard, a worker may stand beside a supply large enough to warm hundreds of rooms. Between him and those rooms lie blocked streets, exhausted horses, missing drivers, and customers unable to reach the gate. He can see the answer to their problem in a black pile. He cannot make the pile walk. Inside a tenement, someone breaks a wooden crate into pieces. The wood is dry enough to burn, and for a little while the stove accepts the substitute. It will not last like coal. It may burn quickly and require more tending, but the room gains another hour. That hour has been purchased by changing an object's purpose. A crate stops being storage. A chair stops being furniture. A parlour stops being private. A railway car stops being transportation. Under pressure, every object is asked what else it can become. The iron stove alone does not change. It continues doing the same simple thing, turning fuel into heat. What changes is the world required to feed it. By the middle of the storm, the household can no longer pretend that warmth begins at the cellar steps. The fire reaches backward through the building, through the street, through the coal yard, along buried rails, and into Pennsylvania earth. Its glow is local. Its dependence is enormous. A hand opens the stove door. The remaining coal falls against hot iron, and for a moment the fire rises. Far away, beneath snow-covered tracks, the next load waits in silence. The next load waits beneath snow-covered tracks, but passengers on another line are waiting too. Their train was built to move. Now it stands in a cut, where the wind has packed snow around the wheels and against the sides of the cars. The rails still exist below, straight and solid, but they are useless until men with shovels can reach them and clear a path that the wind may fill again before the engine moves 100 yards. Inside the passenger car, the first hours may feel like an irritating delay. Coats remain buttoned. Boots rest near the stove. Someone checks a watch and makes a prediction about when the line will reopen. A traveller complains about a missed appointment. Another insists that the railway has surely sent help. The timetable is still hanging somewhere, maintaining a professional silence. Then daylight begins to fade. A stopped train becomes colder differently from a house. A household may have a cellar, pantry, bedding, spare clothing, familiar tools, and neighbours behind nearby walls. A railway car carries only what was prepared for an ordinary journey. Its stove has a limited supply of wood. Its passengers have whatever food, water, blankets, and patience happened to come aboard with them. The delay was not supposed to become a night. Wind strikes the car and pushes loose snow through cracks around doors and windows. People move closer together. A man who has been guarding a whole seat with his luggage discovers that luggage produces very little body heat. Bags are shifted. Children are placed away from the doors. Older passengers receive the least uncomfortable position. The stove becomes the centre of the car, just as it did inside the house. Someone tends it. Someone checks the wood. Someone asks how much remains. The answer becomes less reassuring each time. Passenger cars of the period could carry small wood-burning stoves, useful while the railway kept to its schedule. But the train trapped in the blizzard is no longer following the schedule for which its fuel was measured. As the hours pass, ordinary firewood runs low. The passengers begin looking around the car differently. A card table is no longer only a table. A wooden seat is no longer only a seat. They are dry material close to a stove. Accounts from the storm describe tables and seats being chopped apart when normal fuel was exhausted. The scene sounds almost comic until you imagine the reason. People are not destroying railway property because confinement has made them unusually creative vandals. They are changing furniture into time. A table leg may buy another hour of heat. A section of seat may carry the car toward morning. The railway will probably object later, which is a luxury belonging to later. Tools are found. Wood is broken or cut. Upholstery and unsuitable materials must be separated as well as circumstances allow. Smoke and sparks remain dangers. The stove needs air, yet every draught also carries cold. Passengers who began the journey as strangers now share the same shrinking pile of fuel. Class still exists inside the car, but the storm presses against it. A first-class ticket may have purchased a softer seat, more space, or better service. It cannot purchase a clear track. The wealthy traveller and the wage worker may both be unable to leave. They do not become socially equal, but their bodies answer to the same falling temperature. Yet even here, inequality survives. One passenger has a heavy fur coat, another has a thin jacket. One packed food, another expected to buy a meal at the destination. One is young and healthy, another is ill, elderly, or responsible for a frightened child. The shared emergency is real. So are the different reserves each person brought into it. Food circulates cautiously. A sandwich is divided. A flask is passed. Someone remembers fruit or biscuits in a bag. Railway employees may search for supplies or attempt to reach nearby buildings when conditions permit. But walking away from the train can be deadly when wind hides the route back. The carriage is uncomfortable. Outside it may be unsurvivable. So people wait. Waiting becomes labour of its own. Muscles stiffen. Damp socks chill feet. The air grows close with smoke, wool, breath, and anxiety. Sleep comes in short, awkward stretches. Every time the stove door opens, faces turn toward it. The fire is information. A bright flame means the car still has options. A low glow means another object must be sacrificed. A cold stove would mean the shelter has begun to fail. Beyond the windows, snow rises until the train appears to sink. In reality, the earth has not moved, and the cars have not descended. The wind has simply built walls around them. Light from inside strikes the nearest snow and reflects back, making the world beyond seem blank and close. A passenger tries to see the next car and finds only white. Railway crews face the same isolation with more responsibility. Engineers, conductors, brakemen, and firemen must judge whether an engine can advance, whether another train might be ahead, whether a crew can safely walk the line, and whether fuel and water will last. Telegraph wires are down in many places, so information that normally moves faster than the train no longer moves at all. The railway has lost both motion and knowledge. Relief crews begin attacking the drifts where they can. Thousands of men will be sent to free blocked trains. They shovel packed snow from cuts, switches, wheels, and rails. A snowplow may force a passage, only for wind to rebuild the obstruction behind it. Men work in cold that numbs fingers through gloves, and turns sweat into another danger once they stop. Progress is measured in feet. One rail appears, then the other. A wheel is cleared. A coupling is found beneath snow. The enormous transportation system returns through the movement of individual shovels. Passengers hear digging before they see anyone. A dull scrape reaches the side of the car. Then a voice. Then a dark opening appears where the snow has been cut away from a door. Rescue may not mean immediate departure. The line ahead can still be blocked. People may be guided to shelter, supplied where they are, or transferred only when another route becomes possible. Some trains remain stranded for days, even after the snow begins to weaken. But the sound of a shovel changes the room. The stove may still be burning a piece of railway furniture. Food may be nearly gone. Everyone may smell of smoke and damp cloth. Yet the trapped car has rejoined the human world. A path now connects it to someone outside. That path has been made by labour, not by the engine. Later, The damaged seats can be replaced. The card table can be listed as a loss. The train can be dug out, inspected, and returned to service. What cannot be restored so easily is the old confidence that the railway is always a route, rather than a room. For one frozen night, the great machine of movement survives by standing still. Its passengers gather around a small stove, its furniture disappears piece by piece, and somewhere beneath their feet, two steel rails continue toward the city, carrying nothing at all. The rails carry nothing, so shelter begins moving in the opposite direction. Instead of fuel reaching people, people move toward whatever fuel is already burning. A railway waiting room becomes more than a place between trains. A hotel lobby becomes more than an entrance. A restaurant that cannot serve its normal customers may still possess a stove, a kitchen range, chairs, and walls. An office with a working fire may keep clerks, travellers, and strangers through the night. A shopkeeper who expected to close at 6 may discover that closing the door now means deciding who must return to the storm. No one planned these buildings as emergency shelters. The blizzard assigns them the role. A man reaches a hotel with snow packed into his coat. He may have money for a room, or only need 10 minutes near the heat before attempting another block. The lobby floor darkens beneath melting boots. Wet hats gather on hooks and chairbacks. Guests watch the door open again and feel the room lose a breath of warmth. The doorman closes it quickly. Another knock comes. This is the arithmetic of refuge. Every person admitted adds body heat, but also wet clothing, hunger, fatigue, and another claim on limited space. A room can feel safer as it grows crowded and more fragile for the same reason. Hotels may store more coal than private households. Their kitchens hold food. Large ranges, pots, and workers accustomed to feeding many people. They offer beds, blankets, corridors, and rooms that can be reassigned. Yet a hotel is still connected to the same broken city. Its staff may be unable to arrive. Deliveries stop. Guests cannot leave. A building designed for temporary stays begins operating without knowing when temporary will end. The manager looks at the register. The cook looks at the pantry. The porter looks at the coal. Each sees a different version of the storm. In a small restaurant, food prepared for Monday customers can become an emergency meal. Soup stretches. Bread is divided. Coffee or tea offers heat as much as refreshment. A stranger may be allowed to sit long after the cup is empty, because sending him outside would be bookkeeping performed against the human body. Not every proprietor can afford generosity. Fuel costs money. Food cannot be replaced while roads remain closed. Workers still expect wages. Some businesses protect their own guests or employees first. Some people are turned away because there is nowhere to put them. Warmth may be shared, but access to the door is still controlled. A police officer, porter, clerk, landlord, hotel manager, saloon keeper, or household head decides who enters and who remains. These decisions may be compassionate, cautious, biased, or shaped by class and reputation. A well-dressed traveller can appear respectable. A labourer covered in snow and coal dust may look less welcome even when his need is greater. Women travelling alone face concerns about safety and reputation. Black residents and immigrants may encounter barriers that mainstream newspaper accounts barely record. The surviving stories often celebrate dramatic hospitality. The refusals leave less evidence. At a station, people cluster around a stove while waiting for trains that may not come. Benches fill, luggage becomes a footrest, pillow, barrier, or seat. Children sleep against adults. Railway workers answer the same questions until certainty is no longer available. When will the line open? Is another train coming? Can someone walk to the next town? The honest answer becomes, perhaps, but not yet. That answer is difficult for a system built around schedules. A station clock continues marking minutes with insulting accuracy. The hands move. The passengers do not. Someone checks the face repeatedly, as though the clock might eventually become embarrassed and clear the tracks itself. It does not. As evening closes in, the waiting room changes character. Day travellers become overnight occupants. Coats stay on. A shawl becomes a blanket. Places near the stove are negotiated. A railway employee may surrender a chair to an older traveller while continuing to work. Someone produces food from a bag and shares it with a child whose family brought none. A public building becomes domestic by necessity. People eat, sleep, dry clothing, care for children, argue softly, and listen for news. Privacy collapses, but ordinary rules do not disappear. Families protect small areas around their belongings. Women may stay close together. Strangers take turns watching luggage. A person who appears ill draws concern, because illness in a crowded room creates another uncertainty. The same transformation occurs inside offices. A clerk who cannot reach home remains beside the company stove. Desks are pushed aside. Ledgers sit unopened while coats hang over chairbacks. The employer's coal now heats stranded employees. Perhaps a messenger. Perhaps someone admitted from the street. A workplace that demanded punctuality in the morning may become the place preventing exposure at night. The irony is not lost on anyone awake enough to notice it. Saloons offer heat, light, food in some cases, and rooms already built for people to remain together. Their role varies, and not every establishment becomes a rescue station, but when transport has failed, any occupied room with a stove can become part of the emergency landscape. A church, boarding house, stable office, warehouse, or private parlour may serve the same function. The important distinction is not the sign above the door. It is whether there is heat behind it. Private households face the hardest version because their supplies were measured for fewer people. A knock may bring a neighbour whose stove has gone out, a relative stranded nearby, a worker unable to continue, or a stranger who has lost the road. Opening the door releases warm air. Leaving it closed may leave a person outside. The household head hesitates, but the consequences remain for hours. A guest needs dry space. Snow must be swept away. Another cup of soup is poured. Another blanket is found or divided. The person nearest the stove shifts sideways. Hospitality becomes physical. It is the cold edge of the mattress. It is the smaller portion. It is the host remaining awake to feed the fire while the guest sleeps. It is also information. The newcomer describes the street beyond the door, a drift blocking the corner, a collapsed wire, a shop still open, a route that cannot be crossed. News moves from body to body because telegraph and transport networks cannot carry it reliably. The shelter becomes a small communication station. People arrive with fragments. Someone has seen a wagon overturned. Someone says a hotel further downtown is full. Someone believes the wind is weakening. Someone has heard that trains are moving, though no one knows where. Rumour offers motion when the city has none. By the second night, every heated refuge has developed its own temporary society. There are people with authority, people doing the work, people receiving care, and people trying not to become a burden. Class distinctions soften in some moments and harden in others. A wealthy traveller may sleep on a chair. A servant may remain on her feet serving people who have nowhere else to go. The storm crowds bodies together without automatically rearranging power. Still, one act repeats across stations, hotels, shops, offices, and homes. A chair moves. A wet coat is taken. A place is made near the fire. Outside, the city has broken into isolated islands. Between them lie streets made dangerous by wind, darkness, and snow. Inside each island, the same question is asked whenever the door opens. Can this room hold one more person? The stove gives no answer. It only burns through the coal already delivered and throws a small circle of light across the crowded floor. Beyond that small circle of light, someone still has to enter the storm. A police officer has a post to reach. A railway worker has a blocked line to inspect. A physician has received word that someone is ill. A telegraph employee knows that fallen wires have cut one part of the city away from another. A labourer believes that arriving late is still better than losing the day's pay. Each person opens a door and meets the same wind. Snow strikes the face before the body has fully crossed the threshold. The warm room disappears behind a closed panel of wood. Within moments, the coat begins collecting white along its seams. The street ahead may be familiar, but the familiar street no longer offers familiar guidance. A curb vanishes. A fence becomes adrift. A doorway appears only as a darker shape in the snow. Police officers do not possess motor vehicles, radios, heated patrol cars, or a centralized emergency system capable of seeing the whole storm at once. They work on foot, from local stations, through messages carried by people and whatever communication lines remain. Their duties expand because ordinary danger has multiplied. Stranded travelers need direction. Crowds gather at stations. Fallen poles and wires obstruct streets. People attempt crossings that were safe yesterday and potentially fatal today. At the East River, ice and floating masses reportedly formed temporary passages that tempted commuters to cross between New York and Brooklyn. For a brief time, people treated the frozen water like an improvised street. Then police authorities stopped further attempts because the route could shift, open, or carry people into the river. This is the kind of decision emergency workers must make in a disaster. A crossing may have worked for the last person and still be too dangerous for the next. The officer who blocks it appears unhelpful to someone desperate to reach family. But the storm has made yesterday's common sense unreliable. Elsewhere, police and watchmen search entrances, direct people toward shelter, and confront another quiet danger: exhaustion. A person found sitting in a doorway may insist on resting for only a minute. That minute matters. Cold dulls judgment. Numbness can feel less urgent than pain. Someone who has stopped shivering may not be improving. 19th century understanding of exposure is uneven, but experience teaches rescuers that a motionless person in the snow must be brought inside. The rescue itself costs heat. A wet coat enters the station. A stove burns more coal. An officer who has been outside removes gloves with fingers too stiff to manage the buttons. Then the door opens again. Physicians face similar journeys with more fragile destinations. Illness does not suspend itself because streets are blocked. Childbirth, fever, injury, and chronic disease continue inside homes already strained by cold. A doctor may travel on foot, by sleigh where passage is possible, or with help from someone who knows which streets remain open. The distance is the heaviest burden. A call that normally requires 20 minutes may consume hours. The physician arrives wet, tired, and carrying snow into a room where the family has conserved every degree of warmth. Treatment options are limited by the medicine of the period, but presence still matters. A wound can be examined. A fever can be watched. A frightened household can be told what to do next. Then another message may be waiting. Communication workers are trying to restore the city's ability to send such messages at all. Telephone and telegraph wires run above streets on poles and dense crossarms. Snow, ice and wind pull them down. Poles fall, Wires sag into roads, tangle across buildings, and darken blocks where electric lighting also fails. Repair crews cannot simply replace one neat cable. They confront knots of lines, unstable poles, bitter wind, and streets that may not be passable. It is a town unable to request supplies. It is a railway station unable to learn where the next train stopped. It is a newspaper waiting for reports. It is a family unable to send news that someone has arrived safely. The telegraph operator, sitting at a silent instrument, hears the storm through absence. No clicks, no message, no confirmation from the next station. The machine is intact, the operator is ready, and the world beyond the line has vanished. Repairing that silence requires people outside. Linemen climb or work near damaged poles in conditions that make balance uncertain and metal painfully cold. Exact practices differ by company and place, and the records favour the system's failure more than the names of individual repair workers. Their labour appears mainly when communication begins again. The same is true along the railway. Thousands of men are eventually sent to dig out trapped trains. A crew enters a cut where snow has packed nearly solid. Shovels bite into the drift. The first layer is lifted aside. The next is heavier. Sweat gathers beneath coats. Dangerous because rest will turn it cold. The workers cannot simply attack the snow without a plan. Tracks, switches, wheels, and couplings must be found without damaging them. A path wide enough for a man is not wide enough for a locomotive. A cleared rail line must remain open long enough for the engine to move. Wind treats every shovel as a suggestion. Still, the men continue. A stranded passenger hears scraping against the carriage. A fireman reaches the locomotive. A switch appears beneath the packed snow. The railway returns 1 foot at a time. City streets require the same bodily effort. There are no fleets of modern plough trucks waiting in municipal garages. Horses pull what equipment can be used. Men shovel intersections, entrances, and routes needed for food, fuel, and emergency travel. In some places, tunnels are cut through high drifts. Snow is moved with boxes, carts, barrels, hot water, and whatever methods seem capable of reclaiming a few yards. A human shovel is small, and the snowbank is not. Yet every reopened doorway depends on that mismatch being challenged repeatedly. Delivery workers face a different problem. A shop may have food, a coal yard may have fuel, a stable may have oats. The need is clear, but the load must cross streets that can stop a horse and wagon almost immediately. William Steinway's diary captured the industrial consequences in unusually direct terms. He recorded business suspended, workmen unable to reach factories, and railroad horses going hungry for lack of feed. A city that depends on horses to restore movement also needs movement to feed the horses. The emergency begins consuming its own solution. Some workers still attempt deliveries. Others cannot reach their employers. A person who fails to appear may lose wages despite the danger. The documented case of wire weaver William Scribner, locked out after struggling through the storm to reach his factory, makes the pressure brutally visible. The blizzard does not ask whether work is essential. Employers, clocks, and hunger do. So people step outside for reasons that range from rescue to obligation. One carries medicine. One carries a shovel. One searches for oats. One follows a fallen line. One tries to prove he deserves his wage. Their stories do not all end well, and the surviving record does not preserve each name. Many appear only as workmen, police, crews, or labourers, as though the storm were resisted by categories rather than bodies. But each warm shelter depends on someone crossing the cold space between shelters. Inside, the stove throws light across the crowded floor. Outside, A shovel rises. A wire is tested, and one more person leans into the wind because the city cannot begin moving again until somebody does. Somebody does, but the newspaper may never print that person's name. When the storm begins loosening its grip, reporters face a city hungry for explanation. Readers want to know how deep the snow became, which trains are trapped, how many streets remain blocked, where wires have fallen, and whether food or coal can reach them. Editors need facts quickly, even though the systems that normally carry facts have also been damaged. The result is a historical record full of drama and gaps. A newspaper can describe a drift rising toward a second-story window. It can report an elevated train stopped above the avenue, or a passenger car buried beyond the station. It can count businesses closed, wires down, and bodies recovered after the snow recedes. These are visible events. They happen in public. They make strong headlines. A woman tending one stove through 2 nearly sleepless nights is harder to see. No reporter stands beside her each time she clears the grate. No official form records the moment she gives the warmer blanket to a child. If the household survives without fire, injury, or public appeal, its work may produce no document at all. Successful care disappears because nothing spectacular happened. The room remained warm enough. Everyone ate something. No one died. History is often least talkative when ordinary labour succeeds. The newspapers of March 1888 are still invaluable. They preserve the rhythm of confusion as communication fails and partial reports arrive. They show what people feared, what officials announced, which routes reopened, and which stories editors believed would hold attention. They give us advertisements beside disaster reports, commercial notices beside death lists, and confident claims that may be corrected by the next edition. But a newspaper is not the storm itself. It is a business, a set of pages, a network of correspondence, and a collection of choices made under pressure. Space is limited. Information arrives unevenly. Telegraph lines are broken. Reporters cannot visit every neighborhood. A dramatic rescue receives several paragraphs. A cold tenement where 5 families quietly share one stove may receive none. The surviving page therefore tells us both what happened and what was considered printable. Public disruption dominates. The stock exchange closes. Rail service stops. A famous person is stranded. A major hotel fills. A large business loses money. These stories matter, but they pull attention toward institutions and people already visible before the snow fell. The poor appear more often when they become a crowd, a relief problem, a casualty, or an example in someone else's argument. An unnamed labourer is found in the snow. A servant is mentioned because her employer's household could not function without her. A widow appears when assistance is requested. A child becomes a sentence about suffering. The person may enter the record only at the moment normal survival fails. This creates a dangerous temptation for later storytellers. We can mistake the surviving evidence for the complete population. We can build the blizzard from businessmen, railway officials, hotel guests, prominent citizens, and spectacular rescues, because those stories are easiest to find. Then the storm begins looking more middle class, more male, more urban, and more public than the experience really was. The missing voices do not permit us to invent whatever we wish. Silence is not evidence for a convenient scene. We cannot place exact words in a tenant's mouth, assign private emotions to a servant, or claim that every poor family used the same method to keep warm. We can describe the material pressures around them: limited fuel, crowded rooms, wet clothing, missed wages, narrow storage, and dependence on landlords, employers, dealers, and neighbours. We can show the system without pretending to possess every private thought. That restraint does not weaken the story. It makes the cold more honest. Photographs create another kind of selection. Cameras preserve walls of snow, halted transport, crowded streets, and people standing beside drifts for scale. These images are powerful because the storm becomes visible at once. A person looks small. A city looks defeated. The snow occupies space normally claimed by commerce and movement. But early photography prefers what can remain in front of the lens. A drift waits. A building waits. A group posed with shovels can wait. The hurried work inside a dark room does not. A photograph of a buried avenue cannot show which apartment has run out of coal. It cannot show the servant climbing the back stairs or the mother breaking a crate for kindling. It cannot show who owns the building, who owes rent, who missed a wage, or whose blanket was given away. The camera records the white surface. The social difference remains behind brick. Diaries and letters can bring us closer, but they carry their own boundaries. William Steinway's diary, for example, preserves business interruptions, absent workers, hungry railroad horses, damaged property, and household activity. It is useful precisely because it records the storm as one person experienced it. It is still one person. His position as a prosperous manufacturer gives him access to information, property, employees, and choices that a poor tenant would not share. His account tells us much about his world, and only indirectly about the workers who could not reach his factories. Every source has a doorway. The mistake is assuming the doorway reveals the entire house. Later retellings add another layer. Stories become cleaner with repetition. A striking anecdote survives because it is memorable. Numbers grow fixed even when early reports conflict. One dramatic survival method can be repeated until it sounds universal. The blizzard encourages exaggeration because its documented reality is already extreme. Snowfall exceeded 3 feet in parts of the region, drifts rose much higher, trains were trapped, telegraph connections failed, food and fuel supplies dwindled, people died from exposure and accidents. None of that requires invented certainty. Even casualty totals demand care. Reports appeared gradually as roads reopened and missing people were found. Some deaths occurred at sea. Others were linked indirectly to the storm. Later summaries used different geographic boundaries and methods. A precise number can sound authoritative while hiding uncertain categories underneath it. It is safer to understand the scale than to pretend every victim was counted in the same way. The same caution applies to the title of this story. How Americans survived cannot mean every American. Most of the country did not experience this particular storm in the same way. Even within the Northeast, survival differed by city, town, coast, countryside, class, health, age, race, occupation, housing, and access to fuel. There was no single American response. There were thousands of local decisions made beneath one weather system. Some people had coal cellars. Some bought fuel by the basket. Some sheltered in hotels. Some slept in stations. Some dug trains free. Some remained in cold rooms that left no surviving account. The archive preserves only fragments of this human landscape. A newspaper column here, a diary entry there, a photograph of a drift, a railway report, a name in a death notice, a person described only as a servant, workman, widow, passenger, or unknown man. The absence of detail is not empty space to decorate. It is part of the disaster. The blizzard damaged wires, stopped travel, isolated homes, and made observation difficult while events were unfolding. Social inequality then shaped whose experiences were recorded, collected, and remembered after the snow melted. So when we return to the warm room, we should enter carefully. We can see the iron stove. We can see the wet coats. We can infer the repeated labour required to keep the fire alive. but we may never know the name of the hand lifting the scuttle. The newspaper reports that the city survived. The cold metal handle remembers who did the carrying. The cold metal handle remembers who did the carrying. And the first routes reopened after the storm are built by the same kind of hands. Snow has stopped in some places, but stopping is not the same as disappearing. Streets remain buried. Railway cuts are still packed. Horses stand hungry in stables because oats have not arrived. Telegraph lines hang broken. A city may look quieter after the wind weakens, yet almost every system required for ordinary warmth is still waiting beneath or behind the snow. The work begins with access. A front door must open. A path must reach the street. The street must connect to a yard, station, market, stable, or coal dealer. Each link is short enough to imagine and difficult enough to clear. A man shovels from his doorstep and throws snow onto a bank already taller than his shoulder. His neighbour does the same. Their paths approach one another like tunnels dug from opposite sides. Where the drifts are too high to remove quickly, people cut passages through them. Contemporary accounts describe caves and tunnels in the Great Banks, with boxes, barrels, and even streams of hot water used in attempts to melt or move the snow. It is a city arguing with frozen water, using whatever happens to be nearby. The snow has weight now. Fresh powder has settled, packed, crusted, and mixed with street dirt. Every shovelful must be lifted somewhere, but every available somewhere is already full. Clearing one doorway can block another. Opening a narrow lane for pedestrians does not create enough width for a wagon. A horse may pass where a loaded coal cart cannot. So the city returns in layers. First comes the footpath, then a wider cut, then space for an animal, then space for wheels. Only after that can the coal begin moving again. Railways face the same problem on a larger scale. Thousands of men are sent to free trains that have remained blocked for days. They enter cuts where the wind has packed snow around locomotives and passenger cars. The work is not simply digging down until steel appears. Switches must be found and cleared. Wheels and couplings must be uncovered. Snow must be removed far enough from both rails for a train to move without immediately pushing into another wall. A shovel exposes one length of track. Another crew works farther ahead. A locomotive waits with all the dignity of a machine that has discovered it cannot negotiate with weather. When the first trains begin moving again around parts of New York on March 15th, many others remain stranded. Movement returns unevenly. One line opens while another is still buried. A mailbag arrives after days of silence. A station receives news from a town that seemed to have vanished. The recovery does not happen at one triumphant moment. It flickers. A route here. A message there. A wagon making it through one street and failing in the next. William Steinway's diary records that mails began arriving again, and that his railroad was using sleighs on March 15th. 2 days later, he noted that the line had returned to full running condition, though large mounds of snow still covered the ground. His experience cannot represent the whole region, but it shows how people adapted transport before normal service returned. Wheels struggle in deep snow. Runners do better. So a railroad operation uses sleighs. Recovery means finding the next form of movement the landscape will allow. The horses remain central and vulnerable. They pull sleighs, wagons, carts, and equipment. They help reconnect homes with food and fuel. Yet they have already spent days unable to work normally, and their own feed supply has been interrupted. Steinway recorded railroad horses starving for want of food and sent his son to find oats. The animal carrying the solution also requires a delivery. A sack of oats becomes part of the heating system because the horse that eats it may later pull coal. The connection sounds indirect only until the stove goes cold. Stable workers clear doors, break ice, carry water, inspect harness, and judge which animals are capable of working. A horse weakened by hunger cannot be treated like a machine that merely needs restarting. It must recover enough strength to enter streets where every step demands more effort than usual. Drivers face similar judgments. Take too much coal, and the sleigh may become difficult to pull. Take too little, and the journey helps fewer homes. Choose the wrong street, and the load stops inside a drift. The first successful delivery is therefore not the return of normal commerce. It is a small expedition. A coal dealer opens a route from the yard. Workers fill sacks, baskets, or wagon space. The driver follows information gathered from shovelers, police, neighbours, and anyone who has seen which crossings are open. Customers may wait at doors or come toward the yard carrying containers of their own. The black fuel reappears against the white street. Inside a household, the sound of runners or hooves brings people to the window. For days, every use of coal has reduced a supply that could not be replaced. Now movement outside offers the possibility that the scuttle may become heavier again. Possibility is not delivery. The household may lack money. The dealer may be rationing. Other buildings may have greater need. The route may not reach this block. Recovery follows the same inequalities exposed by the storm. Wealthier customers can purchase larger quantities when supply returns. Institutions, hotels, businesses, and households with connections or credit may secure fuel sooner. Poor tenants who bought coal in small amounts before the storm still buy it in small amounts afterward, assuming the price and stock permit it. The reopened system does not erase the old distribution of power. Food arrives in similar fragments. Bread, milk, meat, produce, lamp oil, and animal feed move through reopened routes. Shops discover what spoiled, froze, sold out, or never arrived. Prices and availability vary. People who shared supplies during the storm now restock, while also settling debts created by missed work and emergency purchases. The city is moving, but many households are poorer than they were 4 days earlier. Factories and offices reopen as workers find routes back. Schools resume. Mail appears. Telegraph service returns line by line as crews repair poles and reconnect circuits. A message that once travelled instantly begins clicking through again, and a silent instrument becomes part of the world. Yet restoring communication also restores demands. An employer can summon workers, a merchant can place orders, a creditor can send notice. Normal life returns, carrying both relief and obligation. Inside the warm room, bedding is carried upstairs. Wet coats finally dry. Furniture returns to its former position. A parlour stops being a dormitory. Guests attempt to reach their own homes. Ash is removed from a stove that has worked without rest. The household expands back into the building cautiously. An upstairs room is opened. Cold air waits inside. The space must be warmed again, but there is no need to rush. One lesson of the storm remains in the body. Rooms are optional. Heat is not. Outside, workers continue cutting paths through grey snowbanks. Trains move past drifts still taller than their cars. Sleighs carry mail and supplies where wheels remain useless. Horses chew the oats that somebody finally found. The great system of heat is rebuilding itself in reverse. A hand clears a track. A train carries fuel. A yard receives coal. A horse pulls a load. A worker lifts a bucket. And beside the iron stove, the scuttle that sounded empty begins, piece by piece, to regain its weight. The scuttle regains its weight, but the city no longer trusts the route that filled it. Before the blizzard. New York's streets and rooftops displayed the confidence of the late 19th century in plain view. Elevated trains ran above the avenues. Telegraph and telephone wires crossed between poles. Electrical lines joined the growing web overhead. Horse cars, wagons, pedestrians, and railway traffic all occupied the surface, because the surface appeared to be where a modern city belonged. Then snow and wind attacked almost everything at once. The elevated lines stopped. Telegraph and telephone wires snapped or sagged. Streets became useless to carts and dangerous to people. Messages failed to arrive. Trains stood above ground with passengers trapped inside them. Visible monuments to a system that had nowhere else to go. The storm did not invent the idea of putting urban systems underground. Engineers, politicians, business owners, and reformers had already argued over underground transit and buried utilities, congested streets, ugly forests of poles, accidents, corporate disputes, construction costs, and public resistance all existed before March 1888. New York did not look at one snowbank on Wednesday and begin digging a subway on Thursday. History is rarely considerate enough to make cause and effect that tidy. What the blizzard did was destroy several excuses at the same time. It demonstrated, in a way no technical report could match, that an advanced city could be isolated by wires hanging in the wind and trains exposed above the street. It turned an infrastructure debate into a bodily memory. Thousands of people no longer had to imagine what surface dependence meant. They had waited in dark buildings, walked beneath fallen lines, slept in stations, and watched elevated trains become frozen rooms. The argument had acquired weather. Above the street, a broken telegraph wire is more than damaged equipment. It is a message that cannot reach a railway dispatcher. It is a business unable to confirm an order. It is a newspaper waiting for reports. It is a family uncertain whether someone is alive in another town. A line that normally makes distance disappear now lies tangled in snow. That failure strengthens the case for burying communication lines where wind, ice, and falling poles cannot strike them so easily. The process would not be instant, universal, or free from new problems. Underground cables require trenches, conduits, coordination, maintenance, money, and streets willing to be opened. The hidden system still needs human hands. Workers dig. Stone and earth are lifted. Pipes and conduits are laid. Connections are tested. Traffic moves around the excavation and complains with the consistency expected of traffic. Yet underground placement changes the kind of vulnerability. A blizzard can bury a street without directly dragging down every cable beneath it. The city begins learning that invisibility can be a form of protection. The same lesson settles around the elevated railway. Before the storm, the L represented speed. Its tracks rose above congestion. Trains crossed the city without becoming trapped behind wagons and horse cars. From the platform, the railway looked like an escape from the street. During the blizzard, height offered no escape from snow, wind, frozen equipment, blocked tracks, and interrupted power or signalling. Passengers were stranded above avenues that people could barely cross below. Ladders reportedly became improvised routes down from stalled cars in some locations, transforming modern transit into something closer to a poorly planned treehouse. The problem was not that elevated railways had never worked. The problem was that everyone had now seen how completely they could stop. An underground railway promised a protected path beneath surface weather and congestion. That promise was not simple. Tunnels raised fears about darkness, ventilation, fire, collapse, cost, corruption, and the deeply reasonable human concern that travelling below the ground felt suspiciously like volunteering to be buried. Those objections mattered. So did politics. So did rival companies, property rights, financing, engineering limits, and the question of who would control the new system. The blizzard of 1888 did not remove these barriers. It gave supporters of underground transit a powerful new answer whenever opponents asked why the city needed such an expensive change. Because the streets can stop. Because the elevated trains can stop. Because a metropolis can wake up and discover that every important route is lying in the same weather. Support for underground transit grew. Construction on New York's first subway began in 1900, and the first line opened in 1904. 16 years separate the storm from that opening. Those years matter. They prevent us from pretending the subway rose directly from the snow like a very punctual tunnel. But memory can influence what a city is finally willing to build. The people making those decisions are not only thinking about passengers, they are thinking about commerce, mail, factories, food, fuel, emergency movement, and the enormous cost of letting a city become still. The blizzard has shown that transport is connected to every warm room. A subway does not deliver coal directly to the iron stove. Buried telegraph cables do not lift the scuttle, yet both belong to the same lesson. Survival depends on systems remaining connected when the surface becomes hostile. The storm has revealed several cities occupying the same place. There is the visible city of tracks, poles, wagons, shops, and crowds. There is the domestic city of kitchens, stoves, beds, and coal bins. And beneath both lies the possibility of another city. Tunnels, cables, pipes, and protected routes carrying movement and information through the ground. The late 19th century increasingly places essential systems below the street, where residents rarely see them unless something breaks. Modern comfort begins to look effortless because its machinery is hidden. That hiding can erase labour again. Men excavate tunnels through earth and rock. Workers handle explosives, remove spoil, lay track, build stations, install cables, and work in dangerous underground spaces. Engineers calculate routes. Clerks record materials. Labourers breathe dust beneath a city that will later enjoy the result without seeing them. The lesson of the stove repeats underground. Comfort appears natural after the work disappears. A future passenger will descend stairs, board a train, and travel beneath a snow-covered avenue. A future message will pass through a protected cable. The journey may still be delayed. The line may still fail. No infrastructure becomes invulnerable merely because it has been buried. But the failure will no longer have exactly the same shape. That is what disaster changes most reliably. It does not create perfect solutions. It makes one old weakness impossible to ignore. By the end of the blizzard, New Yorkers have seen overhead wires become hazards, elevated tracks become traps, and streets become walls. They have also seen small rooms remain habitable because people preserved one working chain between fuel and flame. The public lesson and the household lesson are the same. Do not protect only the machine. Protect the route that allows the machine to matter. Years later, trains will run beneath Manhattan, and more of the city's nervous system will be moved out of the wind. Passengers will travel below streets where the drifts once stopped nearly every wheel. They may never think about March 1888 as the train enters the tunnel. Inside a nearby home, someone will lift a coal scuttle beside an iron stove. The bucket, the railway, and the buried cable will seem like separate things. The blizzard has already shown that they are not. They are not separate. And by the final night of the storm, the people closest to the stove understand that without needing to name the system, the room is quieter now. The wind has weakened enough that individual sounds return. Snow slips from the roof with a soft weight. Somewhere outside, a shovel strikes packed ice. Further away, perhaps, a horse moves through a reopened street, its harness giving one faint metallic shake before the sound disappears behind the walls. Inside, The fire has settled low. No one wants to waste what remains. The stove door is closed. The damper has been adjusted. A kettle rests near the heat. Not because anyone urgently needs tea, but because warm water tomorrow will be easier if the metal is not allowed to become completely cold tonight. The household has learned to think one step ahead. That may be the simplest answer to how people survived the Great Blizzard of 1888 without modern heating. They did not defeat the cold, they reduced its opportunities. They closed the unused room. They dried the wet stocking before it could chill a foot. They shared the blanket. They stretched the meal. They fed the stove before the flame vanished. They took in the person who could not reach another shelter. And whenever possible, they kept someone awake long enough to notice what the others could not while sleeping. None of these actions sounds heroic from a distance. That is why they matter. A disaster on the scale of the blizzard produces famous images: trains buried in drifts, telegraph poles bent beneath ice, Wall Street under snow, men tunneling through banks that rise above their heads. The pictures show a world overwhelmed in white. Survival usually happened in darker colours: black coal on a palm, grey ash beneath a grate, brown wool drying beside iron, yellow lamplight falling across a mattress moved onto the floor, a red glow visible through the narrow opening of a stove. The people in that glow are tired now. Their routines have been broken for days. Some do not know when work will resume. Some know that wages have already been lost. Some have shared food they cannot easily replace. Others are waiting for relatives, travellers, or workers whose whereabouts remain uncertain because messages have failed. The storm may be ending, but uncertainty has not received the news. A child sleeps beneath two coats laid over a blanket. An older person turns toward the stove without waking. A guest occupies a chair because every place on the floor is already taken. Someone near the door has kept boots on, ready to respond if another knock comes. The arrangement is temporary. That does not make it less human. Near the stove sits the coal scuttle. It is no longer full, but it is not empty either. Perhaps a delivery has finally reached the street. Perhaps neighbours have combined what they had. Perhaps the household preserved more fuel than it feared. The exact answer changes from room to room, and many rooms left no account behind. What remains true is that the scuttle has become more than a container. It measures distance. A full bucket means the mine, railway, yard, wagon, animal, worker, cellar, and staircase have all remained connected long enough for heat to reach this room. An empty bucket means that somewhere along that route, movement has stopped. The family may never see the place where the chain broke. They feel it in the iron handle. This is why old-fashioned heating should not be mistaken for simple heating. The stove is simple only at the point of use. Open the door, add fuel, control the draft, receive heat. Behind that motion lies an entire industrial society. And inside the room lies another system, just as complicated: judgment, cooperation, memory, habit, physical labour, and trust. Someone knows how far to close the damper. Someone remembers where the dry wood was stored. Someone notices that the smallest child has become too quiet. Someone gives up the warmer side of the bed. Someone says there is enough soup, even after adding more water to make that sentence true. Americans in the storm survived unevenly. Many endured. Many were rescued. Many suffered injuries, hunger, lost income, or exposure. Many died across the affected region and at sea, while later totals vary with geography and counting. The ending cannot honestly turn the blizzard into a comforting tale in which courage always wins. Cold does not reward good character. Fuel does not appear because a family deserves it. A person can make every sensible decision and still be trapped too far from shelter. That truth belongs beside every story of ingenuity. So does another truth. Survival was rarely individual. The lone figure fighting through snow makes a powerful picture. But the figure is usually trying to reach a room prepared by someone else. A rescuer carries a traveller toward a stove another person has tended. Railway workers free passengers who have shared food and burned seats for warmth. A coal driver reaches a street cleared by shovelers. A doctor enters a house where family members have kept the patient alive through the night. Each act rests on another act. The storm exposes dependence, and dependence is not weakness. It is the ordinary condition of living in a city, a household, or a human body. By morning, the door can be opened a little wider. The air outside is still bitter. Snowbanks still narrow the street. The city is not repaired. But footsteps have appeared where yesterday there was only a drift. A path reaches the next doorway. Beyond it, another path continues. The household begins to unfold. Blankets are lifted from the floor. Chairs move away from the stove. A kettle is carried toward the table. Someone opens the upstairs room and meets the cold that has been waiting there all night. The room smells empty. Its water may be frozen. Its bedding feels damp and hard with chill. Dust lies undisturbed. The person at the doorway does not remain long. The house can be reclaimed gradually. For now, the family returns to the stove. The fire is smaller in daylight. Without darkness around it, the glow looks ordinary again. Soon it will become merely part of breakfast, cleaning, drying, and the familiar work of keeping a house. That is how cisterns disappear after they recover. The train begins moving, and people stop thinking about the track. A message arrives, and no one sees the repaired wire. The room warms, and the hands that carried the coal become invisible once more. But for a few nights in March 1888, no one close to that fire could mistake warmth for something automatic. They knew it had weight. They knew it had a price. They knew it could be shared. And they knew exactly how far the cold room began beyond the stove. One last piece of coal settles in the grate. The flame catches along its edge, faint at first, then steady. Around it, the sleeping room holds. Beyond the closed door, the rest of the house remains cold. For tonight, that small circle is enough.